I'm Arian. Just another guy trying to do the right thing. Engineer, decent job, pays the bills, keeps my mind occupied. Married to Isabella for 2 years. Thought we had a good thing going. The usual. We had our ups and downs, but the foundation felt solid, or so I thought. The last year or so, things started to get weird. Isabella got really, really into a certain brand of online feminism. Nothing wrong with feminism. I was all for equality, but this was different. It was like she downloaded a new operating system for her brain, and it was full of bugs. Every conversation started to feel like a minefield. I'd ask if she could grab the mail on her way in, and suddenly we're having a 30-minute lecture on the invisible workload placed on women. I'd cook dinner, which was most nights, and if I asked her to handle the dishes, I was weaponizing my incompetence by not doing the entire chore cycle myself. These were new words. She used them like clubs. Most of this stuff seemed to come from her best friend, Paige. Paige was a piece of work, always single, always complaining about how there were no good men. Yet her dating advice sounded like it was written by a drill sergeant planning a hostile takeover. Isabella would come back from brunch with Paige, buzzing with new theories about our relationship. Our relationship, which I thought was a partnership, was suddenly a patriarchal power structure that needed to be dismantled. I tried to be patient. I really did. I figured it was a phase. People get into new things, new ideas. It'll pass. I try to talk to her, ask her where this was coming from. She'd just say I was being defensive because I was afraid of losing my privilege. It was impossible to have a real conversation. It was like arguing with a collection of talking points from the internet. I remember one evening pretty clearly, maybe a couple of months before everything blew up. I was in the kitchen making a stir fry, one of her favorites. She was on the couch, headphones on, laughing at some podcast Paige had sent her. I was trying to make it a nice evening. I asked how her day was. She took off her headphones, annoyed, told me her day was fine. But the real issue was the constant expectation for her to perform emotional labor by recapping her day for my benefit. I just stood there with a spatula in my hand, completely lost. I was just trying to connect with my wife. It felt like she was actively looking for reasons to be unhappy with me. She saw malice in everything. If I was quiet, I was stonewalling her. If I tried to talk, I was dominating the conversation. I felt like I was losing my mind, constantly walking on eggshells. The intimacy had been tapering off for a while. It went from something spontaneous and loving to something that felt transactional, like it was a chore for her, another box to tick off on her list of marital duties that she resented. I tried to bring it up gently, suggested we go away for a weekend, try to reconnect. She analyzed the suggestion to death. Was I trying to isolate her from her support system, Paige? Was I trying to use a vacation to create a sense of obligation for intimacy? My simple desire to be close to my wife was framed as some kind of toxic, manipulative scheme. I gave up. I just stopped trying. And then came the day of the big talk. She told me we needed to have a serious discussion that evening. No distractions. I spent all day at work, racked with anxiety. What was it this time? Did I load the dishwasher in a way that reinforced gender stereotypes? Did I forget to validate her feelings about a TikTok video she saw that night? She sat me down on the couch. She had this serious, almost rehearsed look on her face. She pulled out her phone and had notes, actual notes. She started by saying she'd been doing a lot of thinking about our relational dynamic. She said she felt that the physical side of our marriage had become tainted by expectation and male privilege. I just sat there listening. I knew better than to interrupt. Then she laid it on me. From now on, intimacy would be on a schedule. A schedule. She said it was the only way to remove the pressure and expectation, the only way for her to reclaim her bodily autonomy within the marriage. The schedule was as follows. Every Saturday night, there was a time slot, 1000 p.m. to 10:30 p.m., a 30-minute window once a week. I remember just staring at her. I couldn't process it at first. It sounded like a joke, a really, really bad joke. I asked if she was being serious. Her expression was deadpan. She was 100% serious. This, she explained, would be beneficial for me too. It would teach me to value her more, to not take her for granted. It would force me to put in more effort in other areas of the marriage throughout the week to earn the scheduled time. I felt something inside me break. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. Not at first. It was just emptiness. The woman I loved, my partner, the person I had built a life with, was sitting in front of me and talking about our marriage bed like it was a timeshare condo in Florida. She was turning the most intimate part of our relationship into a business appointment, a performance review. And she was doing it with this smug, self righteous expression like she was a revolutionary hero. I looked at her, really looked at her, and the woman I married wasn't there anymore. In her place was a stranger, someone spouting a script written by angry people on the internet and a bitter best friend. A deep, cold clarity washed over me. I wasn't going to fight this. I wasn't going to beg or plead or try to reason with her. You can't reason with a zealot. Arguing would only feed her narrative. I'd be the toxic male trying to deny her lived experience. I'd be proving her point. So I just looked her in the eye. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't show any emotion at all. I asked one question. Is this really what you want? This is your final decision. She nodded, a little flicker of triumph in her eyes. She thought she'd won. She thought I was about to fold. I took a slow breath. Okay, Isabella, I said, whatever you want. The look on her face changed. She was expecting a fight, an argument, tears, something. She wasn't expecting acceptance. My calm, quiet agreement was not part of her script. It threw her off balance. She tried to press on to explain further why this was a good thing. I just held up a hand. You don't need to explain. I understand perfectly. That night, I took my pillow and a blanket and went to the guest room. When she asked what I was doing, I told her I wanted to respect her boundaries and give her the space she clearly needed. How could she argue with that? I was using her own logic against her. She stood in the hallway looking confused as I closed the door. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there in the dark staring at the ceiling. It wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a hostage situation where I was the only one who didn't realize it. And her little schedule wasn't a rule. It was my key. It was my permission slip to leave. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally, mentally. She had just single handedly given me the green light to completely check out, and she was too blinded by her ideology to even see it. The next morning, I woke up a different person. The cloud of anxiety and confusion I'd been living under was gone. In its place was a strange sense of peace, a purpose. My new purpose was simple: get my life in order for me. I went about my day. I was polite to Isabella. I was cordial. I treated her like a roommate, a quiet, unobtrusive roommate. I made my own coffee. I made my own breakfast. I didn't ask about her day. I didn't offer any details about mine unless she asked, and my answers were short and to the point. She seemed to think I was just sulking. I could see her texting Paige, probably describing my childish behavior. Let her think that it was better that way. That first week was a strange one. The silence in the house was heavy. I started going to the gym before work. I hadn't lifted seriously in years. We'd gotten comfortable. I'd let myself go a bit. That first morning, I walked into the weight room and felt like I was home. The cold iron in my hands felt real. It was simple. You lift the weight, you get stronger. No mind games, no hidden meanings. I channeled all my frustration, all my disappointment into every single rep. At work, I changed my approach. There was a big complex project that everyone was avoiding. It was a career maker for whoever could pull it off, but it was a high-risk headache. I walked into my boss's office and told him I wanted it. He was surprised but pleased. I started staying an hour or two later every evening, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The office was quiet. I could focus. It was peaceful. It was a refuge from the silent, tense atmosphere at home. I started eating better. Cooking for one is simple: steak, vegetables, rice. I stopped drinking beer on weeknights. I was taking all the energy I had poured into trying to make my wife happy, and I was pouring it back into myself. And then came Saturday, the first scheduled appointment. I almost forgot about it. I'd spent the day working on a tough coding problem, then went for a long run. I was mentally and physically exhausted, but in a good way. Around 9:45 p.m., Isabella knocked on the guest room door. She was standing there in a silk robe, looking expectant. "It's almost time," she said with a weird forced smile. I swear to God, it felt like getting called into the principal's office. I just nodded, said okay, and followed her to our old bedroom. The whole experience was surreal. It was the most awkward, clinical, and passionless 30 minutes of my life. There was no connection, no warmth. It felt like I was assembling a piece of furniture from IKEA with a confusing set of instructions. I was just following the rules she had laid out. As soon as the half hour was up, I stopped. I said, okay, good night. Rolled over. And that was it. I didn't cuddle. I didn't talk. I didn't stay. I got up, went back to the guest room, and fell asleep in minutes. I think that was the first time she realized this might not go the way she had planned. She expected me to be desperate, grateful for the scraps she was throwing me. She probably expected me to try and push the boundaries, to beg for more. She didn't expect cold, robotic compliance. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. I was up at 5 a.m. for the gym, work all day, home late. I'd eat the meal I'd prepped for myself, read a book, and go to bed. On weekends, I was out of the house. I reconnected with old friends, guys I hadn't seen in ages, because Isabella didn't like them. She thought they were a bad influence, too, conventionally masculine. It felt amazing to just sit around with a buddy, talk about cars or sports or nothing at all, and not have every word analyzed for its problematic subtext. I started hiking again. I'd be gone all day Saturday, just me in the mountains. I'd come home tired and sore, but clear-headed. Isabella started to notice the changes. My face was leaner. My shirts were fitting better across the shoulders and chest. I carried myself differently. I wasn't hunched over with anxiety anymore. She started trying to make small talk. "You're at the gym a lot," she'd say. "Yep," I'd reply. Silence. "That project at work sounds intense." "It is." I wasn't being rude. I was just being factual. I gave her nothing to work with, no emotional hook. The gray rock method, I think they call it. I became as boring and unresponsive as a gray rock. The Saturday night appointments became more and more tense. She started putting in more effort, lingerie, candles, music. It didn't matter. It was like she was trying to decorate a sterile operating room. It didn't change the fundamental nature of the procedure. I remained polite, compliant, and completely detached. She was the one who turned our bed into a boardroom, and I was treating our appointments with the sterile professionalism they deserved. She started getting frustrated. One night after the scheduled event, she tried to get me to stay to talk. She asked me why I was being so distant. I was honestly confused by the question. "I'm just following the rules you set, Isabella. You wanted boundaries and space. I'm giving them to you." She claimed that wasn't what she meant. She said I was twisting her words, being manipulative. It was incredible. She was the one who had drawn these insane lines in the sand, and now she was mad at me for respecting them too perfectly. I didn't argue. I just said, "I'm sorry you feel that way," and went back to the guest room. The wall between us was getting higher and higher, and I was the one laying the bricks. Then came the moment I knew for sure there was no going back. It was maybe 2 months into this new arrangement. My project at work had a major breakthrough. We solved a problem that had been plaguing the company for a year. My boss was ecstatic. He pulled me aside and told me a huge bonus and a promotion were coming my way. I felt a real sense of pride and accomplishment for the first time in a long time. I came home that night feeling good. Not happy, not exactly, but content, solid. Isabella was in the kitchen. She'd been trying to cook more. One of her attempts to fix things. She'd made some complicated vegetarian dish from a blog page recommended. She asked me how my day was, and for the first time in a while, I told her. I told her about the project, the breakthrough, the bonus. I wasn't looking for her approval, I was just stating facts. As I was talking, I watched her face. There was no happiness for me, no pride. I saw a flicker of something else, resentment, maybe even fear. My success, my independence, it didn't fit into her worldview. In her narrative, I was supposed to be the bumbling, slightly incompetent husband who needed her. My newfound competence and self-reliance was a threat to her. She listened. And when I was done, she said, "Well, just make sure you don't let work become a way for you to avoid dealing with your emotional issues." That was it, my biggest professional achievement in years. And that was her response. She couldn't just be happy for me. She had to frame it as a psychological flaw. I didn't even say anything. I just nodded, served myself some of the food, ate it in silence, washed my plate, and went to my room. Any last lingering ember of hope that the old Isabella was still in there somewhere. It died that night. I knew I was done. The question was no longer if, but how. I started looking up lawyers the next day. I found a guy with a great reputation. No nonsense, specialized in cases like mine. I made a consultation appointment. I didn't tell Isabella. I didn't tell anyone. This was my move, and I was going to make it carefully. Life continued. The gym, work, my hobbies, the Saturday appointments continued. But now they felt even more absurd. It was like visiting a distant, strange aunt in a nursing home once a week out of a sense of grim duty. Isabella's desperation was growing. It was palpable. She started leaving the door to her bedroom open when she was changing. She started accidentally brushing up against me in the hallway. She'd try to start conversations about our early days. It was all a clumsy, transparent attempt to get a reaction out of me. It was like watching a nature documentary. A predator trying to lure its prey, not realizing the prey had already packed its bags and bought a plane ticket to another continent. Then came the night of the role reversal. It was a Wednesday, I think. I was in the living room going over some documents for my lawyer. I had them in a plain folder. Isabella came home. She'd clearly had a bad day. She'd also clearly been talking to Paige because she had that look on her face again. They're going to stack us in the after. Isn't the Sam I have a new strategy look. She came in wearing a dress I hadn't seen in years. It was from our honeymoon. She put on music we used to listen to. She opened a bottle of wine. She was trying to recreate a past that she herself had systematically dismantled. She sat next to me on the couch a little too close. She started talking about how she missed me, how she missed us. She admitted that maybe the schedule was a crude tool and that she'd been too black and white in her thinking. It was the closest she'd ever come to an apology, but it wasn't one. It was a tactic. She put her hand on my leg. She leaned in to kiss me, and I just moved away. I didn't flinch. I didn't recoil in disgust. I just calmly and gently shifted my body so her advance missed its target. I looked at her, no anger, just a quiet finality. Isabella, I said, my voice even. It's Wednesday. That's not on the schedule. Her face crumbled, actually physically crumbled. The shock, the humiliation, the utter disbelief. It was all there. She had used intimacy as a weapon, a tool for control, and I had just taken that weapon, unloaded it, and handed it back to her. She couldn't comprehend it. In her mind, men were simple creatures, always desperate for physical affection. My rejection didn't compute. It broke her brain. She just stared at me, speechless for a full minute. That was the moment she knew, truly knew, that she had lost not just the battle, the whole war. She just sat there on the couch, her face a perfect mask of utter devastation. I had used her own weapon, her own logic, her own schedule against her, and it had vaporized her. She didn't get angry. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Not then. She just looked broken like a child who had just learned that magic isn't real. All her theories, all of Paige's confident pronouncements about male psychology had just been proven spectacularly wrong. Her entire worldview was a house of cards, and I had just calmly pulled out the bottom one. I stood up. I think I'll go to bed now, I said, my voice betraying nothing. I walked back to the guest room and closed the door, leaving her alone and in the living room with the ruins of her grand strategy. The next few days were the quietest of my entire life. She avoided me completely. If I came into a room, she would leave. I could hear her on the phone with Paige, whispering in frantic, angry tones. I can only imagine the kind of advice she was getting. Paige wasn't the type to ever admit her ideas were flawed. She would have reframed my actions. My calm rejection wasn't a natural consequence of her behavior. No, it had to be a new, more insidious form of toxic masculinity, a manipulative withdrawal of affection, a coercive control tactic. I was no longer just the passive, clueless husband. I had been upgraded to a cunning, diabolical villain. I could feel the narrative shifting. I was being painted as the bad guy in a story she was writing in her head. Fine by me. The opinion of the jury doesn't matter much when you've already decided to leave the courtroom. I met with my lawyer again. We went over the financials. I had been meticulous in my preparations. I had records of everything. My new salary, the bonus, our shared assets. My lawyer was a shark, but a calm one. He said my position was strong. We had no kids. The house was the main asset. He told me to prepare for things to get ugly. People like Isabella, when their control slips, they don't go quietly. He was right. About a week after the Wednesday night incident, her strategy changed. The silence was over. It was replaced by a campaign of psychological warfare. She started with guilt. She'd leave old photo albums open on the coffee table, pictures of us when we were happy. She'd talk loudly on the phone to her mother, crying about how cold and distant I had become. It didn't work. I felt nothing. It was like watching a movie about two people I used to know. Then she tried to provoke me. She'd make passive aggressive comments about my new lifestyle. Going to the gym again? Are you trying to impress someone? Working late must be nice. A good way to avoid your actual life. I never took the bait. I'd just give a non-committal shrug and keep moving. Every non-reaction from me seemed to fuel her frustration. She needed me to be the monster she was telling everyone I was. My refusal to play the part was driving her crazy. I knew the final confrontation was coming. It was like watching a storm gather on the horizon. The air gets heavy, the sky gets dark. You just don't know exactly when it's going to break. It broke on a Sunday afternoon. I was in the guest room organizing my personal documents, putting everything I'd need into a briefcase. She knocked and walked in without waiting for an answer. This was it. Her face was puffy from crying, but her eyes were hard. She was determined. She had her script. This was her last stand. She started by telling me she couldn't live like this anymore. This charade. She launched into a long, rambling monologue. It was a greatest hits collection of every therapeutic buzzword and feminist talking point she'd ever absorbed. She talked about my emotional unavailability, my refusal to engage, my passive aggression. She said I had created a hostile environment in our own home. I let her talk. I just stood there leaning against the dresser, listening patiently. I was the problem. My coldness was the problem. My self-improvement was the problem. Nowhere in her speech was there a single shred of self-awareness. No mention of the schedule, no mention of the weeks and months she had treated me with contempt. No mention of her turning our marriage into a power struggle. In her version of history, she was the innocent victim, and I was the cruel abuser who had suddenly, inexplicably turned on her. She was pacing back and forth, building up to her grand finale. I could see it coming. Paige must have coached her on this for hours. "I've been talking to Paige," she said, as if that gave her words some kind of divine authority. "She's helped me see things clearly. She's helped me find my strength." Oh boy, here we go. "So, I'm giving you one last chance, Arian," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured drama. "You either start acting like a husband again, my husband, the man I married, or I'm done." She stopped and stood right in front of me, looking me in the eye, trying to project an aura of power. "You need to choose right now. Fix this or I'm filing for divorce." She delivered the line with all the force she could muster. This was her trump card, her checkmate, the ultimate threat that she believed no man could withstand. The idea of a wife leaving, the public failure, the financial hit. This was the button she was programmed to believe would make any man break down and beg. She stood there, breathing heavily, waiting for my collapse, for the tears, for the apologies, for me to fall to my knees and promise her anything she wanted. The silence in the room stretched on. 1 second, 2, 5. Her look of righteous certainty began to falter. A tiny flicker of confusion appeared in her eyes. This wasn't going according to plan. I didn't say a word. I just held her gaze. I let the silence do the work. I let her sit with the full weight of the ultimatum she had just thrown down. I let her see that her ultimate weapon had absolutely no effect on me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I pushed myself off the dresser. I gave a slow, deliberate nod. "You know what, Isabella," I said, my voice calm and quiet. "You're right. It's time to choose." "I agree." The confusion on her face deepened. "You agree?" "Yes," I said. "I agree that we need a divorce." I then turned to the briefcase sitting on the bed. I opened it. Inside was a thick, professionally bound folder. I took it out and held it up. "The thing is," I said, my voice still perfectly level, "you're a little behind schedule." I stepped forward and placed the folder in her hands. She looked down at it, mystified. On the cover, in plain black letters, were the words, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." Her name and my name were right below it. She looked from the folder to my face and back to the folder. Her brain was refusing to process what she was seeing. "I hired an attorney over a month ago," I explained calmly. "These are my copies of the papers. The official ones were filed with the court on Friday. You should be getting served sometime this week." The color drained from her face. I mean, I've seen it in movies, but I've never seen it happen in real life. She went from flushed and angry to a pale, waxy gray in about 3 seconds. Her hands started to shake. The folders slipped through her fingers and fell to the floor with a soft thud. And she opened her mouth, but no sound came out, just a small, pathetic gasp. The powerful, empowered woman who had just delivered a life altering ultimatum was gone. In her place was a scared, confused little girl who had just learned that actions have consequences. She finally found her voice. It was a weak, stammering whisper. But you, how? Why? I decided to give her the truth. Not to be cruel, but because she needed to hear it. Someone needed to tell her. You did this, Isabella. This was all you. You took our marriage, something that was supposed to be a partnership, and you turned it into a game, a power struggle. You read a manual written by miserable people and you followed it word for word. You decided that intimacy, affection, love, that these were things to be rationed, to be used as leverage, to be put on a schedule like a business meeting. I took a step closer. Well, congratulations. You made it a business, and I've decided it's a bad investment. I'm liquidating my assets. Tears were finally starting to well up in her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but tears of pure, unadulterated shock. But I thought she stammered. I just wanted you to value me more. You don't make someone value you by treating them with contempt. I said you didn't want a partner. You wanted a subject to rule over. You didn't want connection. You wanted control. And that schedule. I let out a small, humorless laugh. That was the biggest mistake of your life. You thought it was a leash, but it was a key. You unlocked my cage and you didn't even realize it. The moment you put a clock on your affection, you killed it. You made it a chore. And honestly, I just don't want to do the chore anymore. She finally broke. She sank to the floor, sobbing. Not the performative, manipulative crying she used before. This was real. The ugly, messy, soul crushing sobs of someone who has just lost everything and knows deep down that it's their own damn fault. I felt a brief flicker of pity, just a tiny spark, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of the past few months. The coldness, the condescension, the smug satisfaction on her face when she laid down her new law. I looked at my briefcase on the bed. It had everything I needed. I had already moved my important documents out of the house. My finances were separated. I had a short-term apartment lined up, ready to move into that very day. I had a plan. She had a theory. A plan beats a theory every single time. I picked up my briefcase. My lawyer's contact information is in that folder. I said to the sobbing heap on the floor, he'll be in touch with yours. I walked to the door. I stopped and looked back at her one last time. Good luck, Isabella, I said, and I meant it. She was going to need it. Then I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I closed it quietly behind me. I walked through the house that no longer felt like my home. I got into my car and I drove away. I didn't look back. About 5 minutes down the road, I had to pull over. A wave of something hit me. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't anger. It was relief. A profound, overwhelming sense of pure, unburdened relief. I felt like I'd been holding my breath for a year, and I could finally exhale. The weight on my shoulders, the constant tension, the feeling of walking on eggshells, it was all gone. I took a deep breath of the free air. I was free. The divorce was surprisingly clean. When confronted with the reality of my preparation, her fight just fizzled out. I'm sure Paige advised her to go for blood, to take me for everything I had. But my lawyer was better than her armchair legal advice. I was more than fair with the settlement. I just wanted it to be over. We sold the house and split the equity. I walked away with my savings, my bonus, and my future. She walked away with half of a life she had torched with her own hands. I heard through a mutual acquaintance a few months later that she and Paige had a massive falling out. Apparently, when Isabella's life was in shambles, Paige's advice just got more and more radical. And Isabella finally realized that her friend was more interested in being right than in being helpful. I don't know what happened to Isabella after that, and I don't really care. I focused on myself. I got that promotion at work. I kept hitting the gym. I traveled a bit. I found peace in the quiet, in the freedom. I learned that you can't build a life with someone who sees you as the enemy. A relationship isn't a battlefield. A marriage isn't a game of chess. And if someone tries to turn it into one, the only winning move is not to play.
If this confession kept you hooked, make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We share powerful true stories every day that explore the complex realities of life.